And now here's part 2 of our episode. Oh my goodness. Let me articulate something about it. I feel like this is a song that is mostly rising action. And instead of like bursting off, it ends up turning. When you expect it to kind of like shoot off, it turns instead, which is fun.
Yeah, it's the most pivotal key change, I think, of any song by Animal Collective, for sure.
Yes.
And it also basically does a really great sort of dividing work of the album from this series of like fairly poppy songs. I mean, I think the album structure overall is like impeccable. It's pacing from, really hyperactive to really mellowed out. And this Banshee Beat strikes that perfect balance, I think, of ambient for a while and then a key change before it shifts into something that's almost danceable, but also very emotional, of course.
Definitely danceable.
How long is that song, by the way?
It is, let me tell you, it is 8 minutes and 22 seconds.
Yeah, I just love the fact that we were all just sitting here, in space together listening to this amazing song for like 8 full minutes, just like, oh, what a perfect, a beautiful experience.
Oh, I'm glad.
Not the longest song we've featured on this podcast. I believe that honor goes to Metallica.
I think so.
Okay.
Which, when I think of polar opposites, well,
I don't even know if I would say that they're polar opposites.
I think they don't exist on that sort of spectrum.
It's too binary, man.
Yeah. Yeah. What am I thinking?
Smash the binary. What is this whole exercise been about? If not that?
I think the thing that struck me this time listening to it was I got this mental picture of them in a studio recording this, and like what must it be like to record something that sounds like that.
Yeah.
Like I think earlier, like when we did our best albums of the year, I talked about how on the new Beyonce album, I just wanted to be in the room when she was recording the song Heated to see the sort of way that she like must have been like wriggling her face in order to like make it sound like that, because it just felt like it was so foreign to the way that I was used to hearing her voice. And something like this, I just imagine them all like, huddled over like instruments, playing them in weird ways, and I don't know. It just sounds. It feels a lot like a playground to me, frankly,
or like a sculpture. Even like they're finding the song as they're playing, and like these disparate pieces steadily start to kind of collaborate with one another to turn into something that now is propulsing. And they're kind of following together, like they're lost in the woods, but then they locate one another and say, okay, now let's dance around the fire.
And also too, almost like because it also felt like it was happening in stop motion. Maybe because of like the running underneath it, it feels like it's moving slowly, but it has that sort of like feeling to it. Like I'm seeing it come together as I listen.
I gave you 4,000 points for the most pivotal key change in the Animal Collective body of work, and I gave you 1,000,000 points for talking about how they're finding the song as they make it. Because it's almost like they sound like a jam band. They sound like a jam band. It sounds improvisational, but it is clearly very specifically constructed and intentionally constructed. Before we get to your standards for perfection, I do want to ask you because I think Michael sort of alluded to this, that maybe this wouldn't be the Animal Collective song if somebody said that they wanted to present an Animal Collective album on this podcast. I feel like it would probably be Merriweather Post Pavilion. Their most commercially successful album thus far. Though I will also sidebar on my sidebar and say that their 2022 album Time Skiffs was among my favorite albums of last year.
Me too.
That was a really good album. But I guess I wonder why. I mean, there's clearly the personal connection to it. But what do you think Animal Collective does really well on this album that no other band does? If anything, you can say nothing. Or you can tell me to shut up.
Well, no, I'm just thinking about it, and I'm thinking about Time Skiffs too, because when I first heard and became obsessed with time skiffs also. And for one, I think that there is a broader dominant narrative about Animal Collective that Merriweather Post Pavilion was their quote unquote peak. And then they fell off after that with Centipede Hurts and then Painting With. And there was this kind of, especially critical response to those works that was, Animal Collective is finally retreading old ground. And I think a Pitchfork writer said something along the lines of that it was like Animal Collective the ride. And then there was a kind of famous line in the Centipede Hurts review that was that it sounded like a burrito getting smashed against a car windshield, where all of its parts were assembled too closely together, that it was claustrophobic and messy. And it's, as though that wasn't like obviously intentional and obviously a response to Merriweather Post Pavilion in some ways. In any case, I think that they're all very good. That's, I think not to say,
fair enough,
not to say like, they're all of the same caliber of quality, but with this group, and I don't necessarily treat every group of artists in this way, but I tend to listen to their music, and even if it doesn't resonate quite as much as another album does, I respect their artistic choices and kind of, and just allow them to express whatever they need to in that moment, and can appreciate those choices for what they are. In any case, Time Skiffs was the first time that they had sounded to me like a band in the way that they do on Feels. After Feels happened, each album seems like it's this meticulously constructed piece of art that is inhuman in different kinds of registers, or so produced that it is giving the listener an experience that is outside of a group of people in a room playing instruments, finding a sound together. Time Skiff sounds like a band, and the last time I think that happened was Feels. And so what I think this album does especially well is it takes the various components of indie rock as it was occurring in the Brooklyn, New York scene at the time, and taking it further, taking this sort of assemblage of ideas and a poppy sensibility, but one that is messier, I suppose, or jangly, or a little psychedelic, but then advancing some of those ideas and trying to find the limits or play with the limitations of like what that constellation of noises can sound like together. So to me, it is like the perfect indie rock album because it's deconstructive and because it takes those parts and turns them into something entirely new. It takes it apart and puts it back together again.
Oh, cool.
If that makes sense.
It actually, it really does. And it fits with the non-hierarchical like thing about them as a band in general, right? Because they are just all Animal Collective in whatever permutation they are, which I think is a beautiful thing about this group of people as well.
So, Tyler Rife, when we asked you to supply us with some albums here, you had a very, very difficult decision to make, and we're assuming that in the process of doing so, you had some sort of standards for perfection when you were choosing your albums. Would you care to let us take a peek inside your brain and know what those standards were?
Sure. So I think for a perfect album, you need to create something, and this is obviously so subjective. Like that's the point of this podcast, this amazing podcast, is everybody has their own sort of take on this. But I think one that is really important to me is that the album evolves over time, that it is not something that you receive immediately in all of its components when you first hear it, and then you listen to it 100 times and it's kind of giving you everything at once, that it in some way can be unpacked and unfurled across different registers. So I was saying earlier that I hadn't realized the lyrical content of this album was what it was until somewhat recently. At least in a few cases, I had invented my own idea of what the lyrics were, but I discovered that Loch Raven is this kind of strange Little Red Riding Hood kind of story. And so just things like this, and then also the various instrumentation taking you on different journeys, that it unpacks itself structurally in level of individual songs, that it evolves, that it is a living, breathing thing that changes as you change as a human.
Well said.
So that's one standard.
9,000 points.
Heck yeah. The second one is that the album is not something that is just a way of escaping reality, that it is not something that you enter into to exit out of this world in some way, but instead is doing what a lot of the best art does, which is interacting with your reality and reframing your experiences of the world. I think Animal Collective could very easily be a band that constructs songs that are fantastical, and that, tell stories that are easily intelligible and take the listener on a journey in their own way. But I think that what they're doing is much more impressionistic. As psychedelic and zany as their music can sound, it is still a reflection of this world that we live in through a child's eyes. And I think that really great art makes you want to interact with the world, not exit it. So that's the second one. Then the last thing is that I don't think you can make a perfect album by just executing a vision perfectly. Instead, you need to surprise the listener by deconstructing something that they didn't realize music could sound like before. That you need to do something new. That's why perfect albums don't always come out all of the time, right?
Yeah.
Instead, once in a blue moon, a perfect album catches you off guard because it opens something up about your sensibilities and says things can actually work a little bit differently. For all the sounds that you've explored or all of the sort of incredible amount of exposure that you've had to music over your life, you can still get something new out of this. And I think Feels is its deconstructive sensibility about what rock music can be is its power. That it, reveals a new world. It reveals a new kind of approach to some of the tried and true methods, but in a new way.
Oh,
I'm going to remember that last one.
Holy shit.
Because when I think about like all the albums that I've my top 4, that's I clearly remember the first time listening to them and realizing that I had never heard anything like this before.
Exactly.
And it's just so new and so different that they're ahead of where I need to be. Like it's going to take me a while to catch up to whatever this thing is that they've discovered about the world. But for now, I'm just sort of in this state of shock for a while. Like, I love that. That's good.
Yeah. I especially love this thing about making you want to interact with the world as opposed to exiting it, because I do think that there is the escapist tendency is really seductive, and it's really the term that it immediately brings up in me is like life affirming. It makes me feel like it's not that necessarily negativity or like a negative note isn't part of their music or anything that they make, but it is something that I do think that they are the music that they make is fundamentally life affirming.
Yeah.
So I really love what you said about that. I give you 9,000 points for the album evolving over time and 10,000 for a really, really great art making you want to interact with the world, because it does, Yeah.
Which has been sort of a recurring theme of season 4. I feel like a lot of people this season especially have been talking about how it needs to be something that morphs. As we grow and change, the album stays the same, but we hear it differently. And if we still hear the same old thing, then it's just sort of that thing that you can listen to every once in a while and just be like, oh, there's my comfy little album that I like. But if you want to be growing and changing as a human being, you can listen to an album like this.
Oh, yeah.
And you even need to be sensitive about when you choose to listen to it. So I know y'all really like Radiohead. And I'm a huge fan of Radiohead as well. But I feel like I've discovered that as much as I was able to listen to those albums on repeat when I was in high school or undergraduate or something like that, I'm now very selective about the points at which I decide to throw on Kid A or In Rainbows or OK computer because I never want to dull the power of that music. And I need to, and I go, okay, you know, like In Rainbows is like fall. I need to wait until like I can crunch the leaves and go on a long walk and experience this thing. And so Feels is that way too. Like it was so fun revisiting it for this podcast, but it had been, you know, a little while since I had last listened to it because I want to ensure that it stays, you know, this object in my life.
It's hard with streaming. You know, it's really it's the access. The access is so difficult to really put intention into listening to music because it's just, we've talked about this a fair amount on the pod. It's just there all the time. And so it's hard not to have it on all the time. But I do think having a little bit of intention about when you interact with a piece like this is great. And that's, I do think, you know, you can put any reasons you want on the vinyl revival, you know, like, or I am making big air quotes in person around that. But vinyl selling like it hasn't for 25, 30 years, right? So I think it's a reaction to people craving that sort of intentional, focused experience of interacting with an album. And I think it's the same thing that you're expressing just now of us sitting here listening to just that one song. Us on this podcast going through the effort, and Michael going to the effort of carving out a space for us to listen to our guest's standout track on each episode this season has been one of my favorite things we've done, because we don't really do that a whole lot with each other. It's pretty sweet.
Do you still listen, or have you ever, I guess you probably have, but do you still listen to an album? Like, I mean, not do anything else. Like, you just give yourself a chance to just, like, sit on a couch or lie down or something where all you are doing is listening to the album.
Treating an album like it's a movie, that is my favorite thing in the world to do. And to your point about vinyl, like, that's my favorite and preferred method of listening to music. Obviously, I don't have all the money in the world to buy vinyl all the time.
It's an expensive
but, like,
habit. I say this to my sister.
It's an expensive habit, and it's heavy, and I moved 10 times in the last 11 years, and the constant is any friends who help me move, you know, picking up that, you know, a bin with me and going, what is this? Jesus. Sorry guys.
Good friends.
Yeah, but I do try to, you know, listen to especially artists that I'm excited by and give it a concentrated listen. Or if one of my favorite artists is releasing something new, I will occasionally stay up until midnight and just sit in my living room with headphones on and say, like, okay, I'm going to commit this allotment of time. I literally did that earlier today. I listened to Returnal by One O Tricks Point Never just in my living room, and just to relax, and did nothing but listen to that album from beginning to end. Yeah, it's life affirming.
I want more time to do that.
Yeah. Well, you know, that is something. It is a quality that's shared. I was reading about Panda Bear Noah Lennox, and he's famously lived in Portugal for the last 19 years or whatever. And he said it's because he's a slow moving kind of person, and he wants that sort of pace in his life. And I do think it breeds creativity to slow down. I feel, for those of you who are unaware, most of you people who are listening to this podcast know this. Michael and I are in Canton, New York together. I'm visiting Michael right now, and having this time to work on a project with you, Michael, and to interact with everybody here on campus, which has been such a gift, and have a minute to slow down and do it it makes me feel at my most creative and my most present. So I'm very grateful for this kind of opportunity.
What's the best way to listen to this album?
Medium wise?
And or like the best, I mean, you know, like I've often when I'm prepping for episodes, I'll listen to the album in various capacities, and I will tell you that many of the things we have listened to are not good gym albums.
Oh, sure. This one is, though. At least maybe half of the songs on this one, you can definitely like do some jogging too. But Bees is going to slow you down. Flesh Canoe is going to slow you down probably. Daffy Duck. I suppose like on a crisp fall day, you know, take a long walk and listen to this thing. You're, you know, driving in the rain. It's a great album to listen to in that regard. I think, the notorious thing about Animal Collective is that people people say that it's really great music to do drugs to. And so, that's also something that is a compelling way of interacting with a deeply layered and creative piece of art.
Safely, of course.
Safely, of course.
At home.
Right,
Yeah.
of course.
No driving.
Yeah,
Just
no driving.
Yeah, take care of yourself.
Yeah, these are discrete categories, you know.
Have you ever seen them live?
I have many times.
I have once at Pitchfork in 2011, and it was pretty spectacular.
Sure.
How were they live for you?
Incredible. So
translates really well.
Yeah. And to your point about them being a jam band, that it like translates most clearly in their live performances with these long extended transitions between songs, extended outros and passages, and sort of inserting songs into the middle of new songs and what have you. I saw them do the Sung Tongs 20-year anniversary tour. I saw that in Chicago. It was incredible.
Oh, cool.
Saw them recently in Brooklyn for the Time Skiffs tour, and I was actually supposed to see A.V. Terre in Montreal just this week, but he had some visa issues, so that was rescheduled. Damn. But he's currently touring for his solo album Sevens, which is just phenomenal. And
we should state that we've been talking about them like a collective, which they very much are. It's a very kind of like egalitarian sort of vibe going on, and their solo work in whatever form it is all worth a listen to. I think particularly Panda Bears. I mean, I think I really dig Panda Bears solo work as well. What about anything that you either Animal Collective by Animal Collective or Animal Collective adjacent, or not at all? Any other recommendations you have for our listeners right now? Something to listen to, something to throw on?
So 2 things. 1, Animal Collective adjacent music. Panda Bear and Sonic Boom put out an album somewhat recently. This is last year, called Reset, that is fantastic. Cool. It's built entirely around loops of 1960s and 1970s rock songs, and it is wonderfully immersive and old school psychedelic. So we might say that contemporary Animal Collective is like neo-psychedelia. This is an homage to some old school 60s psychedelic sounds, and it's poppy and wonderful. And then the new A.V. Terre album, as I mentioned, Sevens, is also really great. It's just 7 tracks long. The first half of the album is really optimistic and wonderfully catchy, and then the second half is a lot darker and experimental. And in an AMA, A.V. Terre said that the latter half of the album is a signal for what he wants his future work to be, so we can be excited about the prospect of like darker, Animal Collective and A.V. Terre material. If Time Skiffs was a little optimistic for people and you want them to get into this more stranger, scary, abstracted territory, it sounds like maybe they're moving in that direction. And then, the plug I'll make for something that's completely outside of this group is there is this band from Dayton, Ohio called Death's Dynamic Shroud, and they make a kind of post-vaporwave electronic pop music that is absolutely delightful and immersive. And they had this gigantic album come out last year called Dark Life, and I would highly recommend it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And if you like Animal Collective and you like sort of abstract, densely layered experimental music, but one that is also fragmenting some sort of pop sensibilities that you're familiar with, they're definitely a group to check out.
Love it. We'll make sure you know about that, listeners, in one way or another.
Put it in the episode description.
I mean, listen, Tyler, this is about winning. This podcast. I'm not sure if you remember that. You sound like you have so generously really dove. You've definitely divin into to our back catalog, so we really appreciate that. So you know that this is a competition, and you know that this is about winning and defeating the brief. So I suppose that it's time for us to see how you did and go to the board.
What do you think? Board.
Shall we go to the board? All right. I'm going to break down the points that you got. Starting with the most recent, I gave you 10,000 points for talking about how really great art makes you want to interact with the world and not escape it or exit it, I think was the word you used. Before that was 9,000 points for articulating how a perfect album has to evolve over time along with us, in parallel with us. 1,000,000 points for talking about how Animal Collective sort of sounds like they're finding the song as they make it, almost improvisationally. 4,000 points for this Banshee beat featuring the most pivotal key change in the Animal Collective body of work. 9,999 points for this album being sutured into your very identity. 6,000 points for being a lawn mowing boy, much like me, and having that facilitate your music addiction at a young age. Love that. I kind of miss mowing the lawn, to be honest with you. And
I do not.
and then we started you off with 500 points for music being your favorite drug, because it is. It's the one that will always you can always count on. You gave me that was great for my for my 60-second recap on Animal Collective and Feels. Much appreciated. I think this is a pretty good board. And this has been a lovely conversation, so I think we should take that into account when we are making our decision here.
Why you giving me eyes like that?
Because
you're like I know now that we're in person, you can like look at me. It's like you're threatening me.
I'm not threatening.
Tyler Esselman is threatening me.
I am just making sure you know. Okay. Make the right choice here, Michael. Okay. It's on you.
Okay. All right.
Tyler Rife made an incredible case for Feels by Animal Collective. Seeing the case he made and the points that are on the board.
Yeah.
Does this album go to 11? Is it a perfect album?
I think it is.
Yeah! That was surprising.
There's apparently there's this like soundboard here that we're sitting in front of, and apparently there is actually an applause button on here that I could hit, but I'm afraid that if I hit it, I'll lose the entire recording. So I'm not going to hit it right now.
Is there one that goes like, "Oh yeah"?
There better be.
I wish there's
So
one.
weird.
There's looks like it says "sad trombone" is one of them. So when we're done,
Oh, man.
when we're done recording, we're going to figure out these sounds. You know.
Excellent.
This was great, Tyler Rife. I'm
Yeah,
so
it
glad.
was. Thank you so much for
I'm
having
so
me.
glad that at our faculty orientation, when I mentioned to everyone in the room that I had a podcast, that you were one of the first people to say, like, "Oh, hey, like I'd love to talk about Animal Collective because now we have made it happen, and I'm so glad it did. This has not disappointed at all."
Not a bit. Not a bit.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, folks.
Sure.
It was a pleasure.
Well, it's time for us to tell you about our standout track from the album. What did we choose, Michael?
We chose the opening track, Did You See the Words, which is, I think, you actually described it earlier on, the way it sort of feels like helps you enter the world of this album. And I think it's...
Children laughing.
Yeah.
Is the, opening moment.
It's a great... And I think it's also a nice contrast to Banshee Beat. I feel like there's sort of... I mean, there's like a few different types of songs on the album, but this feels like this represents two distinct types.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely. Great entry point. Great way to end it out. And then also, I think will whet your appetite for a deeper dive into their body of work, which you're going to love, people.
Most definitely.
Thanks, Tyler Rife. Everybody.
Thank you.
We'll see you next week. Thanks for tuning in again.
Bye.
Much love. Bye.